there's never been any other nomination elections in the PC party since Doug Ford took over after that 2018 election. Every candidate is now handpicked by Doug Ford. The PC president that was put in place, a lobbyist, handpicked by Doug Ford. They don't have elections. So Doug Ford solved the voter fraud problem in the Ontario PC party by just stopping elections. What a concept. He's a genius, right? Like there's a great way to get rid of voter fraud. Just stop votes. Stop having votes. So it's not a Patrick Brown problem. It's the people behind the PC party. They had no problem with what Patrick Brown was doing as leader. They simply were upset because it wasn't them doing it.
I have an extra special guest. That would be Jim Karahalios. He is the leader of the New Blue Party. And it's always a delight to speak to Jim and to get his insight on Ontario politics. So first of all, Jim, thank you so much for making time to come on the show. And how are things looking for the New Blue Party, especially I'm going to go out on a limb. I'm going to guess that she is your favorite candidate of all, Belinda Karahalios.
She certainly is, running in Cambridge again, where she was the MPP for 4 years and the first politician in Canada to vote against COVID lockdown measures and to take strong stances like opposing drug injection sites. Definitely ahead of the curve when she was an MPP and running again in Cambridge. The New Blue Party, Dave, you remember we ran in 2022 as our first election. We had about a year to get it off the ground after I was fighting back from a osteosarcoma diagnosis and back to full health. We had 123 candidates in that race. We finished as the fifth strongest party in that election, the best result of any party in their first election in Ontario since 1934. And in this campaign, we had almost no time, Dave, to get candidates off the ground. But we did file 108 candidates, so we're well on our way to solidifying ourselves as the fifth strongest party in Ontario politics, right behind the Greens and far, far ahead of all the other parties that have been around longer than us.
Well, Jim, congratulations for the progress you've made. But let's talk about why are we here to begin with, Jim? I can't remember the last time I went to any kind of an election in the dead of winter, and here we are. The Doug Ford PCs have a supermajority government, as you well know. And I know the ostensible policy reason of the Doug Ford PCs is that we need a strong mandate going up against Donald Trump and his proposed tariffs. Yet, Jim, didn't they have that mandate? Am I missing something? The Ford PCs had almost another year and a half until June 2026 is when the next scheduled election would have occurred. Jim, 18 months in politics, that's an eternity, is it not?
Certainly. And, this is our first time talking, Dave, in this campaign. And voters, I say that because voters seem to have changed their perspective from the first day that the writ was dropped to the fourth. And a lot of voters didn't even know there was an election going on until this week. We had that terrible storm in the middle of the campaign, which made things very difficult. Look, Doug Ford's just taking advantage of the fact that the New Blue Party doesn't get the coverage that we should be getting from the mainstream media, and even some of the alternative media doesn't like to cover us because they're hearing voices in their ear from the PC campaign activists just dreaming of the day when there's another leadership race to replace Doug Ford, and that'll solve everything. So he's really taken advantage of the fact that he doesn't really have strong opposition. The Liberals and the NDP are there, but when he's doing every policy proposal is the exact mirror image of what the Liberals and the NDP want. There's not much opposition to be had there. He certainly didn't have a mandate during COVID to spend more than any other premier had ever spent. He didn't have a mandate after COVID to continue the reckless spending. He didn't have a mandate for anything because everything he ran on in 2018 and 2022, he did the opposite after he got his mandate. But, the PC lobbyists saw an opportunity to extend their mandate by 2 years by calling an election in the dead of winter when it would be really hard to get a strong grassroots campaign going. And they took advantage of it because they're very cynical operators there. And pointing and blaming Donald Trump was a good optical way to address it. But obviously, no one believes that's why he called the election.
No, I agree, Jim. I think they were looking at rosy poll numbers, and that's what prompted that. And Donald Trump, I think, has been a gift to Doug Ford and the PCs. Um, Basically, in provincial elections, usually it's the two H's that are paramount, aren't they? Healthcare and housing. But that's been very muted, I think, in this election. It's all about Ford, perhaps very successfully, wrapping himself up as the superhero Captain Canada, especially since the lights are off and nobody's home in Ottawa right now, and campaigning against somebody not on the ballot, namely Donald Trump and those potential tariffs. And like I said, we will see the numbers in the minutes ahead. Maybe rolling the dice in such a way, cynical as it is, maybe it's going to pay dividends for the premier.
Well, in the short term, it might. He might get away with this election, but I think what the PCs are seeing and calling an election 2 years earlier than they need is they don't want to wait another 2 years for an election because they know they're running out of rope here with Ontario voters, and a lot of Ontario voters will wake up in the next 2 years, and eventually they're going to catch on, especially now that the boogeyman Justin Trudeau's not there anymore, and Doug Ford and the PC operatives can't blame Trudeau for all the wrongs of Ontario. Eventually, the mirror is going to turn on him, and people are going to start realizing that rising cost of housing, unaffordability, lack of affordability, and the healthcare that hasn't improved under Doug Ford's watch. All the buck stops with him on all three of those, and a lot of other issues. And they're going to catch on. So he's sneaking an election by here, try to extend his mandate. But time's running out for Doug Ford and the Ontario PCs, and we've got to look beyond them, and it's going to be a long haul to get Ontario's finances back in place. But the New Blue Party is a place where people believe the best is yet to come, and we're taking a long-term view of Ontario politics. And this is our second election. We're running 108 candidates, and we'll be ready for the next one after that.
Well, certainly when you mention the cost of living, I think that also dovetails into Ford's strategy. Namely, if Trump gets in and those tariffs go through, 25% tariffs, if you think the cost of living is bad now, just you wait till you see what happens later. But, in terms of the New Blue Party, Jim, certainly, in my humble opinion, you are a true blue conservative party. You alluded to this earlier, that when we look at the Doug Ford PCs, I would argue more progressive, less conservative. A few points, and I mean, I wear my colors on my sleeve. Earlier this month, I came out with a list: 10 reasons why conservatives cannot vote for the Doug Ford PCs. Oh, believe you me, there were a lot more than 10 reasons. But really, look at the sex ed curriculum. In 2018, Jim, I clearly remember the Doug Ford PC saying we were going to rein in this nonsense. It's gotten worse, I would argue. If you're a fiscal conservative, we're looking at record debt and deficit. So I'm kind of like Clara Peller, the old lady in the old Wendy's ads, Jim, in the one that would always go, "Where's the beef?" If you're a social or a fiscal conservative, I think this party has been a tremendous letdown.
The Ford PCs have always been a letdown, whether it was John Tory in charge, Tim Hudak in charge, Doug Ford in charge. They do a really good job in leadership races, giving false hope to conservatives. I mean, I fell for it for a few years, Dave. I was a lot younger back then, a lot more naive. And I got tired of helping different leadership candidates and watching them forget about the voters that signed up to support them after they got a nice cushy appointment or got cozy with the next leader, or in Doug Ford's case, became leader themselves. The Ford PCs are never going to be a conservative party. We see this with Doug Ford right now. A lot of his vote base right now is dependent on a Justin Trudeau voter, and he's relying on that in this election. He's abandoned conservative voters. Our challenge is to, through a ground game, get the word out and let more and more people know about the New Blue, and reassure them that we're not a one-trick pony. A lot of people thought that, we in the first election in 2022 is a COVID election, quote unquote COVID election, and we wouldn't run candidates again. We have 108 in this election campaign. We'll be ready for the next one after that. And as our visibility increases and people feel secure that we're always going to be on the ballot, we're always going to be around, our growth can only increase.
And Jim, there's a handful of ridings I'm giving extra special attention to tonight, and numero uno, I should think, is Mississauga East Cooksville. Two factors there. Bonnie Crombie, the Liberal leader, this is her riding, and she's going up against. And I want to get your viewpoint on this because I find this somewhat baffling. Sylvia Gualtieri, who is Patrick Brown's mother-in-law, and from what I hear, this is a real neck and neck race. I think it'll be enormously embarrassing for Miss Crombie if she loses, especially after being the mayor in Mississauga for a decade. But one of the things, dots I cannot connect, Jim, are the fact that why are the Doug Ford PCs allowing Patrick Brown people back into the party? Patrick Brown was ousted in January of 2018. It was no less a palace coup. And yet here we have his mother-in-law with no political experience going in to fight against Bonnie Crombie. Miss Gualtieri's brother is the MPP for another Mississauga riding. I speak of Rudy Guzzetto. And we did a report, Jim, where it looks like sneaky Patrick Brown is using senior City of Brampton staffers to work on Sylvia's campaign, just as he used these staffers to work on his ambitions to become the federal conservative leader back in 2022. But in any event, if I'm Doug Ford, if I'm his inner circle, what's in it for them to allow the Patrick Brown people back into this party?
Well, look, for the first time in my life, I'm going to sympathize with Patrick Brown because I think every man doesn't want to upset their mother-in-law. So if he may have been feeling some pressure there to help her out, doesn't want to bear the wrath of their mother-in-law. Sylvia's been around Mississauga politics for quite a long time, so she might be running for the first time in provincial election, but I think she's got a support base there. So we'll see how that turns out. Kevin Peck's running for the New Blue Party in that riding. We did well in that riding in the last election. We beat the Green Party, so we finished fourth, one of the many ridings where we finished ahead of the Greens in our first campaign. You're getting to the point of the question, why did the PCs allow the people that were around the leader's office when Patrick Brown was in charge? It's because it's the same people, Dave. I mean, we thought that at the time when I was running the Axe the Carbon Tax campaign, that now is very popular amongst mainstream conservatives, that slogan and that advocacy. I was also in charge of the Take Back Our PC Party campaign to try to snuff out the voter fraud that was going on. We all thought it was a quote-unquote Patrick Brown problem. It quite clearly was not a Patrick Brown problem because Doug Ford, when he got in power, he did nothing to address it. He brought in an industrial carbon tax. We have 2 carbon taxes in Ontario. There's never been any other nomination elections in the PC party since Doug Ford took over after that 2018 election. Every candidate is now handpicked by Doug Ford. The PC president that was put in place, a lobbyist, handpicked by Doug Ford. They don't have elections. So Doug Ford solved the voter fraud problem in the Ontario PC party by just stopping elections. What a concept. He's a genius, right? Like there's a great way to get rid of voter fraud. Just stop votes. Stop having votes. So it's not a Patrick Brown problem. It's the people behind the PC party. They had no problem with what Patrick Brown was doing as leader. They simply were upset because it wasn't them doing it.
Incredible. Jim, we're all out of racetrack, I'm afraid. So I want to thank you again for coming on. And my sources tell me that in the York Region riding of Aurora, Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill, a certain journalist voted for the New Blue candidate by the name of Rosaria Wiseman. No names, but in any event, Jim, thank you again. So happy to hear that you're on the mend as well. And please keep us appraised of anything new that's happening at the New Blue.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, sir.
Oh, hi, it's Ezra Levant here in Toronto with an important message because we need your help. Independent journalism in Canada is under attack. Government censors, big tech deplatformers, and the dying legacy media are all working together to maintain exclusive control on the information you receive. They don't want you to hear other voices like ours, and they really don't want you to be informed and to think for yourself. That's why the work we do here at Rebel News is so important. Our on-the-ground reporting, independent news shows, and special content you won't find anywhere else. It's all designed to give you trustworthy information and alternative viewpoints so you can decide for yourself. We don't get government money, and we are not owned by some big global conglomerate. We're funded by people just like you, so please support independent journalism and help us continue our work by subscribing and becoming a Rebel News Plus member today, right here on the page. Go to rebelnewsplus.com.